Hi, everyone. Thank you for checking out this week's episode. I wanted to jump on and offer a small reminder of the ways that you can connect with us. The first way is our socials. So we are Men I've Tolerated Pod on Instagram and Natalie K124 on TikTok, my personal Instagram. And you can find us on YouTube and Pinterest under To All the Men I've Tolerated Before. The second way is by becoming a Patreon member. We are well on our way to our 25 member Patreon, where we are going to unlock bonus perks to being a patron member. Shout out to all of our existing patrons. As an independently ran and funded podcast, your support means everything. Another way that you can connect with us is making sure to subscribe and leave comments wherever you can so we can start reading reviews on each podcast episode. Thank you so much for being here. Make sure to check out the merch store, and we will see you next week. Hey Tolerators, it's Natalie Katona, and this is To All the Men I've Tolerated Before, the weekly podcast where we take a look at everyday misogyny and all the ways it tries to kill our creativity. Today, Annie is back. I'm pretty sure that this is going to be her first time on season 3. We know her, we love her, we TikTok her. It's Annie Sieg, everybody.
Oh my gosh, season 3. Look at you go.
I know.
Wild.
I'm going to be Grey's Anatomy at some point when they're just trying to kick me off the internet. And I'm like, no, 22 more seasons. I've got it in me.
I always forget that podcasts have seasons. I know not all of them do, but like I'm such an avid podcast listener, and it's a thing that I forget is part of that process. Whenever a podcast I listen to takes like a 1-week break, I lose my mind.
And I think the only reason I call them seasons is so I can justify my holiday break.
Girl, take a break when you need a break.
I'm aware, but I won't. We're here tonight to talk about gatekeeping in the art community because we've talked about reality TV and bodies, but we've never talked about all of the work that you do to defeat the patriarchy in the art world.
Oh boy, you make me sound like a much more important soldier in this battle than I think I really am, but I'm definitely more than happy to talk about it. It's a vast and exhausting subject.
Well, please know that you're my most important warrior in this subject.
Yeah, so I mean, the tough thing with tackling gatekeeping in the art world is that it really does go in so many different directions. There's gatekeeping in terms of the way that people are denied access to like arts education in a lot of ways, depending on their financial situation, the community that they're part of, that sort of thing. There's gatekeeping in terms of the constant drive over generations, over centuries of people needing to say this counts as art and this other thing doesn't count as art. By like a crazy coincidence, the thing that doesn't count as art is usually whatever women or people of color are doing. That doesn't count. That gets labeled as like craft or textile or cooking or dancing. Like there are a lot of things that are art that if they are considered traditionally feminine or if they are expanded upon and mastered by people that are not the patriarchy, is then kicked out of the art zone. So I guess my question back would be, where shall we even begin?
So I can't remember if you were the person who gave me the definition of a craft versus an art, or if that is something I stumbled upon on TikTok.
It's definitely something I've ranted about before on TikTok. I don't know that I necessarily specifically gave definitions because I think one of the things that's really hard about that conversation is the lack of clarity in defining those things. I mean, take anyone who's ever made art ever and take anyone period and say define what is art, and you're going to get probably like a babbling, incoherent answer that's not going to match anybody else's babbling, incoherent answers, because even if you in the moment think, oh, I know exactly what it is, as soon as someone pokes at it a little bit, it tends to unravel. Out of curiosity, if I put you on the spot and said, how do you define art, what would you say?
I define art as a physical or kind of meta product of one's creativity.
Okay, so that's interesting. It's a product of your creativity. So then,
but that makes me seem like a capitalist. Because
maybe. But you'll see how quickly it becomes hard to put any words to things, because even right at the beginning you said physical, and then you were like, oh wait, it's maybe not physical. So you're like, but then maybe not physical, product of creativity, but then product implies that it has to have specific value. And I would say even the creativity part is challenging, because if someone directly replicates like a master oil painting, they're doing a study to try and replicate that technique, they're not bringing their own creative vision to the table. But I feel like anyone looking at the end result is probably going to still say it's art. Maybe not everyone, but most people probably would. So that exact struggle, I think, is what most people come against when they try and define art. Even myself, if I tried to come up with something, I would do exactly that same thing, where I'd say, well, it's a thing, maybe not a thing. It's a concept. Well, it's not always a concept. Well, you make it, but you don't necessarily make
it's a brain baby that
yeah. And I was thinking about kind of this subject in coming into today's conversation, because one of the kind of prompt points to mull over that you'd mentioned had been, what are some of the things that stand in the way of people being able to pursue art as a source of financial stability in their lives? It's like a career path. And even in trying to think about that, I found myself struggling about, how do we define what counts as a career artist, a professional artist? If you sell one painting, are you a professional artist? If you're a pastry chef who makes really beautiful pastries at your bakery, are you an artist? I mean, there's the the sandwich makers at Subway are called sandwich artists.
They are.
So it's anything involving the world of art becomes very quickly hard to kind of nail down. But circling back to that kind of art versus craft thing, I think in a very general, broad strokes kind of way, how those two things tend to be separated by most of society is art is seen as this like very highbrow, elite, complicated thing that has like deep meaning, and craft is seen as lesser than and more about the capitalist side of things, which is funny because fine art is absolutely capitalism. But in terms of like, if someone is making purses or jewelry or weaving blankets or like anything that's like resulting in like a product that someone's going to use in their life as opposed to just admire for its quality, I think a lot of times gets put in the craft category. But it is really hard to draw those lines, because at the end of the day, there are a lot of things that fall into a gray area between those two categories, because the categories don't really make sense. I mean, my rant about it on TikTok most recently all stemmed from a review video I saw where someone was talking about, I think it was someone talking about a chocolate artist, someone who made like crazy beautiful sculptures out of chocolate. And the guy who was like reviewing it or whatever was saying how he didn't consider that art. It was like, he called it like decorative arts or something like that. But he meant the same thing. That's craft. That's not art. That's not fine art. And his definition was that decorative arts don't have a meaning behind them. They're just aesthetically beautiful. But I think that falls apart very quickly, because I think that there are probably, works by like Monet and Van Gogh and all who maybe some of those pieces they were just doing as aesthetic exercises. And on the other hand, I think you could talk to that chocolatier and he might tell you that one of the sculptures he did was like representative of the meaningful relationship he has with his child, or like whatever it is that could be very profound and not just about visuals. So I think it's a very hard line to draw, and a completely unnecessary one to draw most of the time.
One of the ways that my brain taught, like in a toxic, like overthink it way, try to categorize when I'm crafting and when I'm an artist is like almost like, well, how much of that did you do on your own? So like I collage, right? So I'll like tear up a bunch of paper, turn it into new paper, and then use a stencil and cut that out and put it on an acrylic painting that I've done. And part of me is like, well, you didn't design that paper though. You just found it and you just bought it. And then it's like, and then you had a stencil. So like you didn't even draw that. You just, again, bought a stencil.
That's where you very quickly will run into arguments with the fine art world, though, because if you take like probably the most famous example of this is Marcel Duchamp. Boy, I always want to say Marcel, blended into one. Marcel Duchamp, because he would do things like in a gallery display like a urinal, like a pre-made urinal, or there are plenty of artists who would put like a bicycle wheel on top of a chair and then paint like one leg red and be like, it's art, prove me wrong. And the reason that was profound art, especially at the time, but still today, is because how do you prove them wrong? And in those situations, like in the case of the urinal, that's a real case. He really did present a urinal as a piece of his art. He didn't make the urinal. His argument was that the art part was him making you question what's art. And so to define craft as something where you're using pre-made things, I think there are a lot of cases where you can use pre-made things and you can still make something that's undeniably going to evoke thought and debate and emotion. And I also think that you could then say, okay, well, is my art more art if I make my own oil paints? If I like grind the pigments, am I arting harder than if someone gives me paint?
Well, and that's literally where I had to get with it, where I was like, very few people are taking succulents and like grinding them into watercolors and then using the ground up leaves to paint, because we've evolved from that step to where I can go to the store down the street and pick up my watercolors. So why is it that because I used a sticker, I was like, I suck?
Yeah. And I think you have to be careful with those things because there is also the degree of like people will take someone's sticker design or someone's illustration or whatever and will like make a tiny change to it and then monetize it and be like, well, if we're saying it can still be art if I'm using pre-made parts, then why is this not my art? And you get, you know, understandably frustrated artists. And that's another area where things just get murky. There are times when I've seen artists get really mad because another artist does something that like objectively probably lots of people have thought of. And you're like, you can't, I understand why this hurt your feelings, but like, bro. And then there's other times where someone will be like, this is my very specific, precise illustration, and Urban Outfitters is selling it on a shirt and not giving me any money. And you're like, okay, yeah, you should definitely be mad. Side note, Urban Outfitters is a huge culprit of that. Be careful when you buy their shirts. They steal a ton of art.
You steal a ton of art. One of the things that I noticed when I started like putting t-shirts together for the podcast is I was like, those fuckers on Etsy, they took one phrase and put it on every cartoon that they could find, and they're selling t-shirts and I'm not. And I probably felt bad for years for also saying like women matter or like give women abortions on a t-shirt because it wasn't like quote unquote a very genius thought.
Yeah, that kind of thing is really tough and it's really hard to litigate because it's hard to prove where an idea originated. It's hard to draw the line for when someone has adapted something to enough of a degree that it is their own. All of it is kind of rough and usually very not fun, with the occasional exception of things like how Kanye West can't sell shirts that say White Lives Matter because two Black radio hosts already bought that copyright, and so he can't sell it, which is my current favorite little tidbit. I don't know if that'll still be relevant by the time this comes out, but it's given me a good giggle today.
I hope all I want for Christmas is for us to find more ways to thwart Kanye. But then I'm also like, ooh, that's a dangerous game because he's gonna get volatile.
Yeah. God, I was gonna say, I feel like I hope that by the time this comes out, the news is like, Kanye has done a huge turnaround and is a nice, sweet guy who's very emotionally stable and kind to everyone, regardless of their cultural and religious background.
Oh, they'll just try to give him the spin that white people try to give me about Rob Lowe. And I'm like, no, Rob Lowe is gross.
Sadly, if it's a matter of people who are rich and famous, the vast majority are indeed gross.
They're gross, and it's a thing. One of the things that I wanted to talk about and brag about is your artists who aren't crusty old white men TikTok series, and the fact that you can't put it in the captions. You say it, but you can't put it in the captions because TikTok hates everyone who isn't a white man, I've noticed.
Yeah, TikTok, I don't understand exactly the mechanics behind it. I'm like the least tech savvy person in the world, but I know from my TikToking that it somehow is able to register when you say certain things. Like it doesn't like if you literally doesn't like if you use the word white, which is insane because what if you're talking about like a piece of paper, but it assumes that you're talking about racial things. It gets mad if you reference any outside platform. So if I say like over on Etsy, I'm having a sale, it'll be like, no one gets to see this video because we don't want them going to Etsy. They should only be on TikTok. It's like real nightmarish in terms of these like kind of secret things it does like that, like censoring. Well, I guess it's not censoring, it still puts it out there, it just doesn't show anybody. So I try to be careful with that series. The series title is Artists That You Should Know About But Might Not Know About Because They're Not Crusty Old White Guys. Just rolls right off the tongue.
Rolls right off the tongue. A really great
And
acronym if we had to make it one.
I try to, like, when I write the captions in and when I put the title on it or whatever, to use like a little white circle emoji and just be like, white guys, because it does get really mad. And I was a little worried when I started doing that series that I was going to have to deal with the inevitable angry white men, which a couple of them have come through. I've had a couple people be like, well, it's a real shame that you have to reject an entire group of people. And I'm like, babe, the whole point of this series is that that group of people has rejected everybody else. I'm not saying that there aren't crusty old white guys who made great art. I'm saying that these are artists that you might not know about because they don't fall into that category and thus have not gotten the same spotlight. That's all. That's all. I'm not.
And argue with me. Like, try to tell me I'm wrong.
I've spent plenty of time at art museums fawning over the art of crusty old white guys. I see it. I love it. I appreciate it. I'm just saying that there's other art out there. And like, truthfully, am I necessarily the correct person to be the spokesperson for this? No, because I'm a white lady. Um, I'm boringly close to the patriarchy. I'm mostly straight. I'm definitely white. I'm a girl. Like I don't know.
I don't
I
know.
I could I could definitely. I feel like I'm not just open to, I'm hopeful that down the line I'll be able to have maybe like guests come in and talk about their own art and make sure that I'm giving a voice to people who fall into some of these categories. So it's not just like me profiting further off of what they're making. I just think that if you have any semblance of a platform, which somehow I've managed to do on TikTok, I'm not like big, I'm not one of those like mega influencers. I have like some followers and I feel like if you I always said that if I had any kind of platform like that, that I wanted to make a point to lift up other artists because I've been on Instagram for years and I have a fairly small following on Instagram. It has not translated over from TikTok. And TikTok I have like 30,000 followers. On Instagram I have like 1,000. And I've been on Instagram for years and I always was like seeing other artists that I know and follow and appreciate like blowing up over there. And I wasn't trying to be salty about it because I'm happy for anyone to have success, but I always thought, on the rare occasion that one of those people would repost something I did or shout me out in some way, I would see a boost that to them took a few seconds, but to me made my day and felt like a little step towards progress. And I was like, oh my God, if I had a platform, I would do everything I could to try and build other people up. And so the first thing that I did with that on TikTok, once I started getting a little bit of a following, was doing an art crush series where I would just highlight people who are current day makers on the app who I appreciated, who I liked their art. So I would be like, hey, if you're following me, you probably like art. Look at this other cool art. Do you also like it? Go follow them. And I still do those sometimes too. And then I thought about expanding that out to more of a historical context because there are a lot of people who either are no longer living, who still had really beautiful, amazing art that I don't feel like gets the attention or the conversation that a lot of the crusty old white guy art does, and it would be nice to kind of bring that to the table. And then I've just started dipping my toes a little bit into highlighting current working artists who fall into those categories. I was kind of scared to do it because I don't like the idea of speaking for anybody about the meaning behind their art. But it started because there's this artist, Bisa Butler, who I have like had the biggest art crush on for so long. She does these amazing quilted pieces. I just adore her. And on one of my other videos, someone commented being like, "Oh, you should talk about Bisa Butler. She's on this app." And I was like, "What do you mean she's on this app? What are you saying to me?" And I knew she was on Instagram. I followed her over there and she has like a bazillion followers. She's is well established on Instagram, but I went over to her TikTok, and TikTok is a really hard platform for a lot of people to navigate, even really well established artists like her. And so, like I said, I've got like 30,000 followers or something, and she had like 7,000. And I was like, hold the phone, because this isn't talking trash on me. This is just factual. She's a much better artist than I am. Like, it's, again, not slamming myself, just stating literal, actual facts. She is phenomenal. Her work has been in huge museums around the world. It takes such technical skill. I just adore her work. And so I did a video being like, "Excuse me, TikTok."
TikTok.
Go over there, get. And so that was the first time that I like covered someone who wasn't just like, "Oh, this is my like buddy on TikTok," and wasn't a long dead history nugget, but was actually someone who's fancy now. And it made me like a little nervous, but I think I'll probably do some more of that because she was really nice and grateful about it. It was like, "Oh, cool. I really appreciate it." And it made me realize that there are probably a lot of other contemporary artists who maybe know how to navigate the really complicated and confusing world of getting your work in like the Chicago Art Institute, but don't necessarily know how to navigate the app where teenagers dance at each other. So if I can help in some way, I'm more than happy to.
When I'm going back to that comment from that guy who was like, "Oh, it's so sad that you feel like you have to like cut out an entire group of people who's had privilege for hundreds of thousands of years." I was watching Remember the Titans today because I have to cover it on Still Comfy on Monday. And it hit me on this watch around of Remember the Titans that whole movie boils down to like the white coach and the white men on the team just felt like they shouldn't ever have to be in jeopardy of their attention or spot on the team or anything because they were white man and they had done football correctly for so many years. And I go, that's what it is. They never want to compete because they're so scared of not getting the most attention in the room.
Yeah. And I mean, I do understand. I feel like just in the last few years, I've had to have the like very harsh realization of that I can relate to and understand the patriarchy more than I would like to. Because I think growing up as like a baby angry feminist, I was like, I know all the struggles and they are mine, and I am the victim of the patriarchy, and I'm furious, which is sure valid, whatever. But it's just been in more recent years that I've gotten better at like listening to other people and understanding that, like, first of all, struggles are not competitive. It's not a competition. It's not linear. But also understanding that, like, I don't know. I guess I really only recently wrapped my head around like really understanding what intersectionality is in feminism, because I always thought of it as like, yes, feminism should allow other things to factor in, which is kind of like a very dumb, simple explanation of it. But I didn't understand as much the idea that it's this kind of interwoven fabric where it's like any one individual's identity is composed of so many intersecting factors. And each one of those carries its own oppression. So my femaleness carries certain baggage and certain advantages. My straightness carries certain baggage and certain advantages. My you know, I don't know, whatever, think of all the categories, whether or not you have a disability, your age, your financial bracket you exist in, whatever, all of these things come with so much weight to them. And in order to understand someone's place in society, you have to look at all of those pieces. And I guess it wasn't until recently that I really like looked at my intersection and had to realize that, like, aside from being a woman who's not filthy rich, most of my things are like pretty high up there on the patriarchy scale of power, which means that I need to like, I don't know, put some work in. I feel like I went way off on a tangent there. I apologize. I'm not the most linear thinker today.
But that's what it's about, right? Like, that's why I invite people who I don't know onto the podcast to have conversations with me about ways that the misogyny and the patriarchy has affected them, because I can't experience all the things. I am not Vision from the Avengers. Like, I can't do it. And I would never want to be the person who has to experience all the things. So it's a lot of listening and it's a lot of empathy. And while I understand, like, well, yeah, it would shake me too if I was the richest, prettiest girl at the ball. And then I mean, it happened to Brooke Davis on One Tree Hill, where one day she was the prettiest, richest girl in the high school. And then her dad went, I embezzled a lot of money. They might be putting me in jail. And then she was like, no, we're poor. And you watched her, like, entire identity have to shift, because she's like, I'm the girl who has friends because I can afford limos to anything we want to do.
Yeah, I think that a lot of times people don't realize wherever they fall on that scale of power, how fragile that placement is, how little it takes to, pull the wrong Jenga piece and to have your kind of social weight shift. We say that all the time with people who suddenly lose their money or fall ill or whatever, like things shift and it really changes how they're viewed and how they're interacted with in a way that they don't always love. And also it goes the other way too, where someone can be pretty low on the totem pole and then have this like insane glow up where suddenly I mean, not to take it back to Kanye, but where they're living like the top of the power pyramid, and it also screws with them in a very different way.
Well, and there's so many ways that, like, privilege is presented to us, like we have it. So, like, take falling ill. You can be a person and you think that you have really great insurance right up until you get something life threatening going on, and you're like, I'm going to have to pay how much until whatever I got either gets fixed or kills me.
Yeah. Or it's someone who has a physical issue that leads to disfigurement or something that changes how they're viewed in terms of like the pretty privilege of it all. It's all ever shifting. I mean, that's why we see so many women on the verge of a mental breakdown on Real Housewives, because part of their social standing is tied to physical beauty. And our society has decided that after a certain age, you stop having that. And it's really uncomfortable for people to move backwards on that scale and to feel some power slipping from their grasp, especially given the fact that, to circle this back to the patriarchy sucking ass, the same thing doesn't happen for men.
Mm-mm.
I mean, there are girls fawning to this day over Johnny Depp, and he looks like the inside of a purse, and he apparently is an abusive nightmare. And I was one of those girls who, like, back in the day, thought he was an absolute dreamboat. And I'm not trying to age shame him. There's a lot going on there. I'm not into it now. But the point is, his social standing hasn't been affected by his aging. It has been affected by other things, although honestly, not that affected, shockingly. Um, and yet, by comparison, if you take most like supermodels or actresses, they've either had to put so much money and work into cosmetic surgery and fillers and all of these things, or they are just seen as like, oh, she was beautiful. And I'm not saying anything that's new to anybody, but
You said it during our season 2 finale, where you can't win at all, because if you do the work to get work done on your body, they're like, oh, you cheated. You were pretty, but you had to cheat to get there.
that's like why women generally are never-endingly furious at men who say that they like girls who don't wear makeup, because it's like, okay, no,
You're a moron.
you like women who wear lots of makeup that you're too dumb to understand as makeup. That's not the same. That's not the same. And it becomes the same thing with like aging and cosmetic surgery. It's like you hold them into this insane beauty standard, but if they do the things necessary to meet that standard, you're going to judge them for it. If they wear the makeup, if they put on the Spanx, if they get the surgery, then they've somehow failed. But if they don't do those things, then they are ugly and powerless. Okay.
I think also, like, one of the fun things about privilege is there's always going to be people with more privilege than you, and there's always going to be people with less privilege than you. So there are days where you wake up and you're like, I'm doing a really great job. Look at me fly. And then there are days where you're like, fuck. I feel like I'm being shit on every avenue and whatever. And it just depends on who's surrounding you at that moment. And I feel like that happens with me and my creative expression, because it'll be like, look at me, I wrote a poem. I'm a poet. And then I go to a poetry slam where people are doing slamming spoken word that I can't speak to rhythm to. And I'm like, no, I forgot that spoken word was trendy, and I forgot that I have no rhythm, and I should have learned all of Eminem's songs in natural rhythm earlier in life, so I would be good at spoken word.
Yeah, that seems like what you should have done.
Yeah,
that makes
I should have listened to Eminem more.
Well, that's like when I was going to school for illustration, the first time I went to a Comic-Con, and I went to New York Comic-Con, which is still huge, but it's not the Comic-Con.
Yeah.
But the first time I went to one, I was shocked by what an emotional journey it was, because there is so much amazing art there, because all the comic book artists and illustrators and animators and everybody has prints for sale and figurines and things going on. And so you walk around this like massive building and you're like, I'm so inspired, I'm so inspired, I'm so inspired. And then you start reaching this point where you're like, except for like every single idea has been had and every single thing has been done, and are there any ideas left, and can I do things as well as any of these people? And you start like turning towards self-doubt. It's easy to reach that kind of weird where you're like gatekeeping from yourself. You're like, I can't, I'm in a different bad category, I can't reach this.
I love walking Artist Alley at Gen Con and telling every artist that wants to talk to me exactly what skills I don't have. Like, I'll just like look at their art and be like, I noticed that you actually drew your watercolor before you like put the watercolor on it. I suck at drawing. I've never been good at it. I'm not good at shapes. I'm just real bad.
I'm not good at shapes.
I'm just like not good at straight lines. I refuse to get a tool out because ADHD doesn't remind me where that is, and I just don't. And then they're just like looking at you like, is this a compliment or are you spiraling? And it's both.
It can be both.
Yeah.
Well, I think the place that artists will get frustrated with that kind of commentary is only there's a world of feedback that artists get that's like, oh my gosh, you can draw, I could never do that, I could never make that, that's not a thing I could do. And then you'd be like, cool, have you ever tried it all? And they're like, no. And you're like, well, there's something about saying it that way that sometimes comes across to people as like you're implying that they just have this like natural miraculous skill that they haven't put like a ton of effort and energy into. But that said, I can pretty much guarantee you that the vast majority of artists that you talk to probably also have imposter syndrome and cripplingly low self-esteem and would probably love to be told that they're good at shapes and colors. So I'm sure you're fine. But I just think, you know, I have known some truly phenomenal artists who can convince themselves that they suck, and your brain is lying to you. Your brain is lying to you, and art is a learned skill. You can have a cool aesthetic, you can have creative ideas, you can come to the table with some of the tools, but no one would expect someone to just know how to be a really good writer. They have to learn how to write. It's the same thing with any art form, dance or acting or singing or any of it. You might have some natural skills behind it, but it's a skill you have to continue honing.
Well, and I think that one of the like secret but not so secret gatekeepers that we just have to go through is the American school system. So it's like I have a picture in my head and then I put it on paper and then I look at it and I'm like, fuck, didn't you want like a whole like reflection over here? And then you just didn't put it there. Fuck. You're like, also, you had to like look this up on your tablet and then trace it because you don't fucking know how to draw a hermit crab and whatever. And you just start to pick it off. And it's like you start to grade yourself on a rubric of what was already in your own head. And that's a direct reflection The reason why I don't like to draw is because I remember how awful it was. I think it was 8th grade where we created the grid, and that was a nightmare for me, where we made the circles. And then I have like a picture of Ava Gardner that I also had to put on a grid, and that was its own set of nightmare. And then I had to do square by square Ava Gardner's face. And it was so overwhelming for me to have like that many steps to just be like, I wanted to draw this lady, and you told me I had to draw this lady. And then after all of this effort, I probably still got a D because I could never get the nose hand motions that you were trying to tell me made a nose. And so I got a D on it, and now I know that I cannot draw because I did all the steps in the right way and you still gave me a D.
Well, now we're going to get into the thing that I can talk about eternally, which is flaws in the arts education system. Um, I feel very strongly about this because I hear so much trash being talked on arts education constantly. A lot of people have very negative experiences, like what you're describing, being pressured into making art a certain way, being graded on their art, being told by teachers that their art wasn't good or that they couldn't do things. And as someone who was lucky enough to, at a lot of points in my life, have very positive arts education experiences, I'm aware of like what it can be and what I think it should be. Um, and it makes me furious that arts education gets that reputation, because then what happens is people start saying, you don't need to go to school for art. You don't need to be tutored. You don't need to apprentice. You don't need to do any of these things because like we were just saying, what even is art? Everything is art. Do whatever you want. And I'm not saying that there's no truth to that, because there are outsider artists who never have any kind of formal training or education who make beautiful, wonderful things. And that is great. But the way that I look at arts education, at least how it should be, is that it should never tell you how you have to accomplish your goal. It should introduce you to new tools that you can use to get there. So if we take like a transportation metaphor, you can walk, you can take a car, you can take a train, you can take a bike, you can take an airplane. Whichever one you do, you're eventually going to get where you're going, but you're going to have a really different experience and potentially slightly different end results depending on what you're doing. And a lot of people say, well, I never need to get that kind of education because if I can walk from A to B, that's enough. End of story. And if you're someone who's really good at walking and really enjoys walking, you're right. And that's fine. But in my life and in my experience, I would rather learn how to use all of those modes of transportation. So every time I need to go somewhere, I can decide which one makes the most sense for me. I can go, you know what, I could walk there, but it's a beautiful day. My bike is tuned up. I'm going to take my bike. And that's not me shitting on people who would rather walk. It's expanding my options, being able to approach it in a different, more creative way that I feel fits better. And so in the situation of like you doing the gridded work, I think that if someone wants to be a really well-rounded artist, they should learn how to use a grid. They should learn how to mix a color wheel. They should learn how to mix a gray scale gradient. All of those kind of things I think are really valuable tools, even if the reason they're valuable is for the experience that you had, which is saying on the other side of it, I hated that and I never want to do it again. To me, that's still a victory because you learned that that's not the mode of transportation you want. But maybe you become a really successful artist and you get commissioned to do a mural on a huge wall, and you look at it and go, you know, I really hated doing that grid, but I feel like the way that I could be most successful working on this huge of a scale and not freak out is to do exactly that. That's a tool I now have and know how to use, that in this one instance I do think fits me. Or maybe you never use it at all, but that's something you now know about yourself and about your process. And I think too many teachers in the arts education system say you need to learn how to do a grid so that I can tell you if you did it well or not. And that's stupid and not how art works. And that's also so disheartening to so many up and coming artists to feel like that's something that they can fail. I think as an arts educator, if you're working with someone on how to create a piece from a grid and you see them not succeeding in terms of, I don't think they should have to make a nose look a certain way, but if they're not fundamentally understanding the purpose of the grid and how to use it, that's a failing on the teacher. not a failing on the student. And the student should be made to understand that they're being shown how to use a tool. And if they're not liking it, that's one thing. But if they don't know how to use it, it is because they were not taught in a way that they could hear and understand.
I have an example of what I think is a really great way to present art to elementary students. I saw on TikTok, I believe this was it had to be a kindergarten class with the way that she was delivering it and the content of the lesson. But she was combining line types and form, and she had cut out a lot of different colors of strips of paper, and she was like, you have to have a zigzag, a curly, and a straight, because those are our lines, and your statue has to have height and width. And that was those were the only instructions. And she demonstrated one more time how to like make a curly and a zigzag and to keep your paper straight. She had her own statue, and she goes, but or she built one right in front of them, and showed them like, well, earlier this morning mine looked like this and this one looked like this. And honestly, when I was doing tutoring during the pandemic, all I wanted to be doing was the elementary education art projects. I was like, I forgot how, like, the kid would look at me and be like, what are you doing? I go, oh, I'm going to tear up paper and I'm going to put it in this bird shape because I forgot how much I like having my hands busy tearing up paper and then making a bird collage out of it. And she's like, okay, rock and roll.
Well, and that's where, if we go back to the arts versus craft thing, I think a lot of the things that tend to get pegged as craft and kind of devalued in that way are things that serve that exact purpose you were talking about, where it's like a meditative, I'm using my hands, I'm creating a thing. Maybe you're not putting the pressure on yourself for it to need to have like a profound, deep meaning and to be hung on a wall and just like people go like, ooh, beautiful. Maybe it has some other purpose, maybe not. But I think that a lot of times, because of dun 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 capitalism, we tend to look at the value of art being in what the final product is, when, like so many other things, a lot of times the value is in the process. I mean, I just made my crazy Ouija board coffee table, and I'm very happy with how the end result turned out. But I knew when I poured the resin top over it that there was a risk that some of what I'd done on the bottom layer was going to get destroyed. And I even thought, I was like, should I do like a test patch first? And I was like, no, because the part that was the biggest value to me was that I spent the last 3 days making something I was excited about. And I knew that even if it fell apart at the end, those were 3 very valuable days that I was happy with. So I just think that like people need to, when they're feeling weird or stagnant in their art, take some time to think about where the value is for them. Because if they are trying to monetize their practice, then there is a real value in making sure that everything you make not only is a good finished product, but it's a product that you think people are realistically going to give you money for. But if you're someone who likes the feeling of making something with your hands and turning your brain off, or so for some people it's not turning their brain off, it's really digging into more complicated emotions, exploring deeper thoughts and feelings, if those are beneficial to you, then who the fuck cares if anyone wants to pay you for it? If it's therapy, normally you have to pay for it. So it's nice that, it's, you get to have that experience, whether or not anybody else sees value in the end result.
And sometimes I do come out of like the fog and I'm like, fuck, I really like that. Look at that beautiful thing. Like,
that's the best feeling when you're like, ooh, I made something I straight up love.
I did that on the same vein of your, no, it's not tarot, it's Ouija. I'm a practicing witch. Do you see me like being like, I don't know, you made a divination tool?
Words never come out of me appropriately. I'm not judged.
I went as a Sieg for Halloween 2022, and I hand painted a witch hat from Halloween City. And then I kept hand painting it because I was like, that doesn't look like water yet. It doesn't look like the ocean. And then finally, probably because I was running out of time, I went, who's going to tell you that your hat doesn't look like the ocean and therefore you do not look like a hag? It doesn't have to be the physical representation of the ocean because you're working in a circle. Like, there's not going to be a consistent like sea foam, dark water, light water. Like, it's a brim. And then I glued the sand on before I glued on my embellishments. And I was like, should I do a test patch of this sand or should I just paint Mod Podge onto this hat and then throw sand at it and then shake it off and then hope that the seashells will glue to it because I have enough hot glue to make that happen. So I threw the sand on it first, and what I quickly realized was that the embellishments were stuck to the sand, but not the hat. So it's a very fragile hat that not one thing fell off of while I was dancing at silent disco.
That's not that fragile. You did great. I would say that sent my brain in two different directions. The first direction is a small note, which is I think you need to get into spray adhesives. I'm just going to throw that out there. I think sprays and sealants could really help you in this in future years.
It was a Mod Podge, throw, spray the seal adhesive, and then pretend like I had patience to wait until I threw more sand and then sprayed it again.
Patience is it is the hardest part of everything. I can't do it. I can't. I don't have it.
When I use Mod Podge with paper, I know that I can blow dry it. And then the waiting is over because I blew dry it. But I was like, you can't fucking blow dry sand. It's going to be everywhere. It's going to get in your eyes.
Can't do it. The other place that took my brain was another shift I've tried to make in my art practice that has helped me. So who knows? Maybe it'll help other people. Maybe it won't. Is I try to think of almost everything I make and do art wise these days as a very exciting draft. So like I'll do it as if it is the final thing. I'll make the table, I'll paint the painting, I'll sculpt the whatever. But when I'm done, if it's not perfect, I'll be like, what are the cool things I learned that I'm going to carry into the next thing? And what are the things that are bad that I'm not going to do next time? And it's like, I just try and look at it as a constant learning process as opposed to anything ever being like a grand finale, you know? So maybe your stand wasn't perfect, but the next time you have to make an insane Halloween costume, you have all these cool new tools at your disposal. You learned things from the process.
Because all I did was tell everyone that I started it 2 days before I needed it and then quickly realized I had overestimated how much energy this was going to take, which is every Halloween. If I'm not panicked the day before Halloween, hot gluing myself to a thing while I was trying to hot glue another thing to a thing, I've done Halloween wrong. I didn't do it right. This is how I Halloween. As soon as someone said, well, what about next year? I went, oh, next year I'm going to be a fall witch, an autumnal witch. I go, I'm going to make a witch's hat that's covered in fall colors and fall foliage and just like, harvest materials. I go, and I'm also going to make a cape. And I'm going to make a cape of very pretty cascading in a gradient pattern leaves. And they were like, oh, and I was like, yeah, because I was like, I made a cat hat. Why not make a cape?
I'm going to tell you now, just because the thrifty nerd in me can't resist, you got to get yourself to like a Hobby Lobby or a Michael's, like not Hobby Lobby because they're conservative nightmares, but Michael's or another craft art supply store that doesn't hate abortions. You should get to one of them and right now because all of the fall stuff is on like mega sale. Although I gotta say, and this is completely off topic, I don't know what happened. Normally, the week after Halloween is my like sale section binge shopping time.
Mhm.
I'm like, I need wigs, I need skull candles. I like give me all these things because I'm a Halloween year round kind of bitch. And everywhere I've gone has been Thanksgiving stuff on sale. Thanksgiving hasn't even happened yet.
Yeah.
And there's been like a couple of like weird skeletons in the corner that they're like, just take them if you want them. I'm like, where's the Halloween section? What happened to all of it?
I
Did
started
it sell out?
around right after school started. I started making bi-weekly trips out just to see what was on sale because I realized that they pushed everything back. And then which also meant that they pushed everything on clearance being literally the week of Halloween.
It's crazy. They've now, and again, I just like this is so like hack. Like everyone's talked about this, like oh Christmas comes so early now, but like they literally put things on clearance sale before the things happen. In which case, what it doesn't make sense to my brain. But this definitely has nothing to do with gatekeeping and art, so we can change the subject. I wanted more skulls. That's all I'm saying.
It does, because I think what also plays a lot into the gatekeeping of art is the way that they train us to have a scarcity mindset.
Oh, I see what you did there.
Yeah, because that's what they're doing, right? They expected you to go out this first week of November and be like, time for my sugar skulls, and they would be nowhere. And that's what happened to me 2 years ago. I went out the week after Halloween and I was like, where's all my loot? And it was gone. And then that trained my brain to be like, start shopping for your Halloween loot in September, which means that I bought things at full price because I was like, you'll never see it again. This is exactly what happened to you last year.
Yeah, that's definitely a thing across all bases, and it definitely applies to the art world. I feel like the place that like the scarcity mindset is taking a really strange turn in art right now is the whole NFT debacle, which I don't really want to wade into because it only makes people yell at me on the internet because I am the curmudgeon who refuses to play the NFT game. I hate it. I don't like anything about it. I think it is very bad. But I also know that a lot of people view that as like, you know, as if I was still insisting on using a pager instead of a cell phone. A lot of people are like, well, it's what's happening, so get on board. But I think that it causes some real weird issues in terms of scarcity because there's some asshole somewhere just recently burned an original Frida Kahlo drawing and sold like 500 NFTs of it or something afterwards, which is upsetting on like a whole bunch of different levels. And if anyone's listening to this, they should Google this because I'm probably not telling it correctly. But I know it was a Frida Kahlo, and I know that it is gone, and that he is NFTifying it. And his argument was like, I could sell this one drawing for however much money, or I could sell like 500 people digital versions for like also lots of money, but more times. And it turns the fine art world has always, to some degree, been an elaborate scheme for wealthy people to launder money. Like, it just has. Especially when you get into like performance art and some of that. I'm not saying that the artists aren't still valid, but a lot of what's happening is rich people shifting money in shady ways. And that's made it feels like they're not even like trying to hide it anymore once it becomes like a fancy JPEG that they can sell 6,000 versions of. It's like, then what are any of us doing? Like, what is the value in any of this then? I hate NFTs and I feel that they are the downfall of art, but I guess maybe I'm just old fashioned and experimenting.
I understand that because as a person who doesn't like to make a lot of money, or I'm sorry, as a person who doesn't
What?
make a lot of money,
I was like,
I would like
I can help you then. Just give me your money.
I would like to make money, but I've never made a lot of money in my life ever. I I love that artists will replicate their art in prints that are then reasonable for me to purchase, or sometimes Annie just gives them to me for free. And then every week on Instagram Live, I go, that's all Annie's art. It's on there on the wall.
Butts by Annie.
Butts by Annie. If it's a butt, it's Annie.
Well, and I think that a lot of the people who would slap back at me about NFTs would make that argument that like it's not new for there to be copies of art. Artists make prints, and you know, you can get into things like Warhol screen printing things. There are lots of cases of artists who have their primary source of income has been mass production of art. No shame in that game. I'm not saying that it's not a pre-established thing and it's relevant. I guess art's just reaching this area of change between NFTs and AI art, because that's another area that's like a real hot topic right now. I struggle with it because I fundamentally don't like any of those changes that are happening, but not for really particularly logical reasons, for like feeling reasons. It's the same thing as I went to a very fancy, expensive art school and I like aggressively refused to learn almost anything digital because I was talking earlier about the process of making art. I don't like the process of making digital art. I just don't. And I don't care how many people tell me about what technology can feel like you're drawing on paper, but you're not. Whatever. Shut up. I like traditional art. I like the feel of it. I like the idea that, you know, something I might put a little bit too much of a certain medium down and it spills out in an interesting way and I have to try and fix it or catch it or adapt to it. Like, no matter how closely robots learn to replicate the flow of watercolor, it's not the same. And so when it comes to AIs and NFTs, there are all these very highbrow arguments about value and about how we define art and about all these things. And my answer is like, but I don't like it.
I don't like it.
I don't like
it. It doesn't make my soul happy. So that's what it is for me. I recently brought my junk journal, my very small starter one, to book club because one of my friends from book club saw a story of one of my collages and her first thought was, my God, I could never do that. I go, you really don't know how easy this is. This is the one thing that I do in front of the TV. I crochet in front of the TV, but my crochet stuff never turns out like symmetrical because you have to count. And she was like, no, it's just like, it's one of those like freedom of expression things that I could never get into. Meanwhile, she's actively making stained glass. And I have been a lady who has taken like a pan of clear glass and glued other glass on top of that and had another lady fuse that in a kiln for me. And then I was like, look, I made fused glass. But like stained glass, there's like a blowtorch. And I'm like fascinated by fire, but also very scared of what I would do with fire. So it's just one of those areas where I'm like, nope, I'd hurt me. I'd hurt the cat. I'd hurt the world. Like, I would love.
But again, this circles back to failures on the part of arts education, because earlier when I was saying art doesn't have a right or wrong, methods have a right or wrong. There is a right or wrong when it comes to the safety aspect of it. There are certain things where it's like you just need to like make sure you don't cut your hand off or set yourself on fire. And that shouldn't be scary to seek out. Like if you are genuinely excited about the idea of doing stained glass, it shouldn't matter that there are a lot of barriers in terms of understanding what a patina is and how to use a flamethrower or whatever it is. Clearly, I don't know a lot about stained glass, but I would love to also. And that should be something that feels like it's not gonna break your heart to go learn from someone, because they're not going to be a dick about it if you don't just intuitively know all of the tricks of the trade. Mm-hmm. And enough people are scared of being made to feel that way that they don't seek out that kind of education. And I think it's also a failing on the part of the arts education system that your friend had that reaction of like, I don't know how to be open-endedly creative, because people aren't born that way. You talk to any 3-year-old for a few minutes and they're like, oh yeah, give me some paint. I'll show you right now. And they'll just paint like a crazy pile of garbage and be like, it's a duck. Can't you tell, you dummy? And you're like, oh, okay, I got it. Like, they're not worried that what they're doing isn't right, that it's like bad and ugly and that they've failed. They're like, I'm drawing a duck. Like, I nailed it. I'm great at this. And somewhere along the way, enough people with some semblance of authority verbally beat that out of them until people are like, oh, I can't do a creative thing. That's not how being a person works. Everybody can do a creative thing. It's just a matter of getting past those mental blocks that society's crammed in your head.
So I brought my physical journal to book club and I was like, I'll tell you which pages are trash and which pages I thought could make a great greeting card. And people were flipping through it or whatever. And it's so odd watching people just like flip casually through your brain babies, because you're like, did you see how I put purple against pink right there? It worked. But I ended up telling them, I go, one of my weird hiccups with my art journaling is so my sister taught me how to art journal, and she loves very straight, very segmented, very much like this pink square was meant for this yellow flower and it's in the square. Where Natalie likes to rip edges, and I hate having blunt edges in my art journal pages, to the point where like I will drive myself crazy to be like, that corner looks too purposeful. And I feel like that's how I feel about digital art, where it's like I can't get messy.
Yeah, I mean, I have seen some digital artists who make work that genuinely, I've been making art for my entire life. I will look at it and be like, I don't know if that's digital or not. Like, I don't know. And so again, it's not from the logical standpoint. Like I've been forced to learn digital art for work reasons, because if you're working for like a client doing like a logo or an ad or something, you're not going to send them like a crayon drawing you made. You have to give them something.
I have done that for a tarot deck though. I have been like,
there are situations where you can do traditional work for clients, but a lot of what's coming down the pike these days, the expectation is that if it doesn't start digital, it gets digital somewhere along the way, at least for revisions and things. So I have gotten to where I'm somewhat comfortable with it as a medium. And my argument is not that it's in any way fundamentally bad. It's really convenient when you screw something up to have an undo button. Like, there are times when I'm painting where I'm like, oh, I just ruined this in a way that is unfixable. That I understand the value of digital art in that way. Like I said, there are artists who make work that has all of that texture and feel that I love out of traditional art, but that they can make it in digital. It's just in terms of the actual act of doing it, it doesn't feel the same to me. It doesn't light my fire in the same
I
way.
have to be very tactile. Like, what if I never felt glue again on my fingers? That would make me so sad. I think another way that I've noticed, and this is going to be the last one, I think a really gatekeepy thing that we do is when the 3-year-old smashes some paint on a paper and then goes, idiot, it's a duck and it costs $10. Someone has to come in and go, now remember, you have to be a doctor, you have to be a teacher, you have to be a bus driver, you have to be something. It happens with people that I love a lot who are raising children or adjacent to people who are raising children. And I was at a loved one's house and the children were playing with Play-Doh and I was controlling myself and not taking all of the Play-Doh. But one of the children had mixed up all of this Play-Doh, made it flat, cut it out, and was like, it's earrings. And then said something like, I want to do that when I grow up. And then someone told them that that wasn't a real job, so you need to find something else to do. And then I went, hold on, I have an entire app filled with people who make earrings all day, every day out of polymer clay. And I pulled up TikTok. I go, do you see what she's doing? That's what you just did. She has a whole video that may or may not be making her store money. But here's her store. We can click on it right there. She is charging people for these earrings that she made out of polymer clay. So don't let anyone tell you you can't do it.
The place that I've come to in terms of the, like, do I make the jump to professional artist conversation? Because I have people message me sometimes and ask for advice on monetizing or, quitting their day job or whatever their version of that is. And the place that I've come to with it, and this is maybe an insensitive comparison, I certainly don't mean any offense by it. It's just genuinely how I think about it. Is it's the same way as people will say, if you are coming out as gay, as trans, as whatever that you think your family may not be okay with, depending on your circumstances, that it's really good and it's important to be honest about who you are and to live your authentic life. But before you can do that, you have to make sure that it's not going to completely fuck your life up. If you are completely financially dependent on your parents, if you're 12 and your parents are a bunch of bigoted jerks, and if having that conversation with them means that you could end up unhoused, it's okay for you to not say it yet. It's okay for that to need to take some time and for that journey to not go the way that any of us would wish that it could go at that exact moment in time. I feel that way about art as a career. I think that a lot of people view it as like, I just have to like take the leap and believe in myself. And there are times that people do that and it works, and that's amazing. And I'm so happy for them and excited for them and proud of them. But there are times when people make that leap and then it really screws them up for a while. And that's not to say that I think anyone should stay in a soul crushing day job for forever. I think that you have to do that same kind of priority check. You need to say, okay, what do I need to live by? And if the job that I'm doing right now makes me miserable and I want to be an artist, can I cut down on how much I need to in my day-to-day expenses? Can I change my living arrangement? Can I get, a side job that's fewer hours but higher bucks so that I can part-time be an artist and then build my way over? Like, there's so many different paths you can follow to get to the end result of being whatever quote unquote a professional artist is, that I think it's weird that it tends to be talked about as this thing that's so black and white. You are or you aren't, you're doing it or you're not doing it. I consider myself a professional artist. I consider myself to have been a professional artist for a very long time, but there have been periods of my life where what that's looked like is I'm working more than one full-time job to make sure that I can eat and have a roof over my head. And I'm making art from like 2:00 in the morning to 3:00 in the morning, 2 days a week, because that's all I can manage. And those weren't the ideal times, but that's not how it stayed forever. And I was able to, through various means get to a point where I could just do this. And even then, when I say just do this, I'm not just like sitting in a studio painting my feelings all day every day. I have clients that I do like boring graphic design work for that I still consider an artistic pursuit, but is like, is it? I think it's less black and white than people think, and I think they need to make a point to take care of themselves first, because you can't be a successful artist if you can't be a successful like version of yourself. If you can't feel good about where you are, if you can't feel safe, if you can't feed yourself and house yourself, how are you expected to make these like beautiful groundbreaking masterpieces when you're just trying to hold your life together, you know?
How are any of us supposed to be doing anything in a world where they just make it really hard to hold our lives together?
Yeah. And like, are there exceptions to what I just said? Absolutely. There are people who have made beautiful art while dying of heinous diseases and while living on the streets and while doing all these things. And again, just like I'm happy for the people that make the jump and it works, I'm happy for the people who are able to generate beautiful work out of really dark periods of their life. For a lot of us, though, that's not the case. And I just want to stress the fact that if anyone's listening and that's the position they're in, there should be no shame in that. Like, there's no set timeline for what your entrance into the art world is supposed to look like. There is no supposed to. You just have to make the things that feel good for you to make or feel important for you to make. Whatever it is that draws you to art, you have to satisfy that thing inside of you, but you also have to take care of yourself.
All right, well, we'll get to the two traditions on to all the men I've tolerated before. What do you think is the biggest lesson or takeaway you've personally gotten from gatekeeping? And not because you're a gatekeeper, but the idea of gatekeeping in the art community.
Honestly, I think I kind of used to a little bit be a gatekeeper. I think there is that scarcity mentality, and there was a period in my life where I felt like other people's success somehow took away from mine. That if someone got some exciting opportunity, I was a little salty bitch about it because I wanted that opportunity. So I think the most important lesson I've learned is that that's fucked up and not how it works. And that it feels so much better to be able to be genuinely excited for other people. And in the situations where you find yourself, even in the tiniest way, holding the microphone, if you realize that in that intersection of all of the things that people have to deal with, that you have some slight advantage, that you have a slightly bigger audience, that if you can use that opportunity to bring other people up with you, you're going to be happier where you get. I think that would be my biggest takeaway.
Well, that was lovely. You called yourself
Thank
out and grew all within a sentence.
That was definitely more than a sentence. It was a long, rambling run on, perhaps.
One of my friends who listens to the podcast, she's like, what I like the best about your podcast is y'all just admit when you're wrong, too. And I was like, yeah. Could you imagine? Taylor Swift is so pinpricked on anything and everything she puts in a music video or a lyric. Do you think I want to be the bitch who's like, I'm never wrong. I'm mega talented, baby.
All right. Well, you can't talk trash about my girl Taylor.
No, literally. I'm the person who's like, let Taylor put whatever she wants in her music video. Do you know what we've put her through?
I was going to say, my argument is not that she does everything right. My argument is, can you look at the life this woman has lived? And the fact that she acts even slightly okay ever is a miracle. Also, I cannot stop listening to anti-hero, so just leave my girl alone.
I think my biggest takeaway from gatekeeping because I was my biggest gatekeeper of my own creativity. And I think my biggest takeaway has been to let it be. And I think I learned that from watercolors because they have a mind of their own. And you're like, I wanted this to be perfect. And it's like, I don't know. The water that went this way, though.
Oh, watercolor is the medium to teach that lesson for sure. It is a big one for it's going to do what it wants to do and you got to roll with it. And it's also a big one for patience. That's why I very rarely do watercolor.
Where are you hoping that we go next as an artistic community?
I guess, and this won't be a surprise given how much I've said about how I just like hate computers and I love touching things. I kind of hope that there's a resurgence of the experiential side of art. I hope that the outcome of all of this very tech heavy stuff, all of these debates about AI and NFTs and whatever, leads to people leaning more into the feeling of making art and the process of learning about art, as opposed to just the value of that final product. I hope that people are taking screen printing classes and glass blowing classes and learning how to do like old school lithography. Like, I want all of that because it's cool and it's beautiful and it's fun. And I think that a lot of people after a certain age stop learning or stop actively pursuing learning. And I think the arts are a place that you can keep learning forever. You're never going to run out, and it's going to stay fun as long as you don't get a shitty asshole teacher. So don't do that.
I had a lot of good art teachers too, who taught me how to paper mache and then made me realize what it's like to have your hands feel happy.
Yeah, it's a thing. And we spend so much time now on and around it in front of screens. Again, I sound like everyone's grandma, but like the same way everyone's like, touch grass, I'm like, get some paint on your hands, touch some paint, touch some charcoal, whatever.
A new friend wanted to go on like a 6-mile hike, and they put it in a group chat, and my response was, I don't think you want to go on a 6-mile hike with me. I want to take a picture of every tree from every angle in case I want to trace it later. Also, I need to touch all the moss. And what if the rocks look wet? I'm going to have to touch that too. I think what I'm hoping for moving next kind of goes hand in hand with yours, because I just want our community to get bigger. Because I feel like joining the community is the best way to empathize with the community. So if we take away some of the barriers of people's just mental and emotional states about art and creating, and just go, nah, look, like, I mean, that 4th grader is doing it. I bet you your hands could do that. Let's get some glue and just start breaking that down. And people just started, I feel like that's how you get people to buy in, is you invite them to the table.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's nice that the prevalence of social media is giving artists more of a direct line of communication with their audiences. It's easier for niche artists and niche markets to find each other. It's easier to hear in an artist's own words what they're excited about, what they're doing. Like, there are a lot of upsides to it. There are also a lot of downsides, but there are a lot of upsides, and definitely the sense of community is a big one for sure.
Annie, make sure that everyone knows where to find you in case they haven't been listening.
I am Annie Makes Art on TikTok, and on most other things, like on YouTube. And I don't know what's going on with Twitter right now, but I'm not that there, but I don't think anyone's going to be that there for long. And then on Instagram, I'm AKSIEG, which please go follow me on Instagram. I need followers.
Please go follow her on Instagram. That's where I repost her stuff, because TikTok just started letting me repost things. And I love getting hundreds of notifications every day that everyone loves what I'm reposting. And I'm like, click on my fucking picture.
That's like anything I post on TikTok that's talking about other people's art. People are like, we love it. And then I post my art, and like 2 people are like, okay.
Okay.
Like, oh.
Look, you did it.
I love building others up, but we can also build me up sometimes. I wouldn't hate that.
You know, how are we supposed to make other people popular if we ourselves are not popular?
The struggle is real.
The struggle is real. But make sure that you're going to Men I've Tolerated Pod to then click on all of the things that I like to repost from Annie, and then make sure that you're checking out. I honestly realize that the holidays are over by the time this episode is airing. However, I have been picking 1 or 2 of my favorite holiday saying shirts that will just live on in the merch shop. Like, I don't know, we're still workshopping like the I'd be grateful for abortion rights, or one of my friends said on the 12th day of pregnancy, Ohio denied me an abortion. Yeah.
I remember at some point there was conversation about Fiona the Hippo / abortion rights / Christmas crossover. Yeah. And when that comes, I'm ready to have a pro hippo, pro choice Christmas shirt.
Fiona is a feminist icon. Did you see the nutcracker they put of her in the zoo? I'll send it to you.
Fabulous.
I'll send it.
All right, we got to get off here so we can send each other a bunch of links. Oh my gosh.
Tolerators, remember, you don't have to smile through anything you're tolerating, including someone who is going to make you feel like whatever it is you're creating, doing, or feeling passionate about isn't actually giving over to the greater good. Smiles are for joy.